Well, thank you for the privilege of being here and allowing me to be here. And it's been a blessing. And y'all did do a great job at this conference. You really did. So thanks for investing in pastors. 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 10 says, "Deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears." Hannah, as you recall, couldn't have children. I think my wife and I have one of the ministries that we started when we were Sunday school teachers, and then years later as a pastor that we were really heavily invested in was just that the whole adoption, foster care, and because we knew so many in our churches who were struggling with infertility or whatever. Every time we would celebrate somebody's baby coming, we knew somebody was sitting there with a broken heart. It's often a hidden pain in our churches, as you know. And this is just for whatever it's worth. We just didn't celebrate Mother's Day the way some churches do. We just didn't make as big a deal out of it just because I knew we were just lumping coal on someone else at the same time. And one year, this is just a free one, we knew a handful of people who were struggling with infertility at that time. And Eric, you'll know Daniel Doss, his wife was at that point. And so we raised some money on the side and sent them out for the day, just to enjoy Mother's Day out, because he knew the church was so hard on them that day. But just a very hidden pain. And no one around Hannah seemed to understand the depth of her pain. Hannah's husband had his own problems to deal with. He was a farmer, and you can imagine just the stress of work that it would have been real for him. He had two wives, so he had double the stress of the average man. And guys, don't laugh too loud at that one. But his other wife taunted Hannah for not having children, and year after year, Hannah followed the same routine. She went to the temple and she prayed. And if you recall, Eli the priest thought she was even drunk when this story occurs. And I think Hannah's story illustrates something for us. It illustrates the fact that you can have a good relationship with God, you can have a healthy spirit, and you can also at the same time have an unhealthy soul. The only point I want to make from this story is Hannah's spirit was okay. I mean, that's what drew her to the temple every year. She didn't lack faith. The unhealthy part of Hannah was her soul. She had an unhealthy soul. And I'll just be honest with you, pastors, we haven't always recognized the fact that there can be a difference there. Sadly, we're reading so much these days about pastors struggling with mental health. We've all been shaken recently with suicides. In my job now, I hear things sometimes. There's been another pastor commit suicide just recently. I don't know that it's been made public yet. We just did an email blast through Leadership Network on mental health a couple of weeks ago, and we received more feedback from that one blast than any other the history that they've been doing that email. We are following it up. A pastor in the Dallas area reached out to me, and he had battled severe depression. Don't know if he ever got to the point of feeling like he wanted to take his life, but he was certainly battling depression. And so he walked his church through a 4-week series on mental health, and I'm interviewing him for this next Leadership Network advance that we send out. But it's an issue that we're all having to deal with. And in full disclosure, I should tell you, I struggled once with a form of depression. And for me, it was after my boys moved out. Eric Stevens in the back there, one of your local pastors, used to babysit my boys, or at least one time he did anyway. And they loved that. They was like, when we came home, they're like, "Why did you come home?" They just loved that. But we loved our boys, and they're my best buddies. And so when they moved out and life was just different, I went through a real lot of emotions I didn't know I was going to have. And the crazy thing was the church was growing as fast as it ever had. That was one of the years we made the fastest growing church list. My marriage was good. I was physically healthy, but my soul ached. And speaking from the counselor side in me, one of my masters is in counseling, I knew I had a mild depression going on, and yet no one really knew it was happening in the church other than my wife and a few of those people closest to me who helped me through it. As we talked this morning, sometimes we pretend to be who we really aren't. We put on a happy face regardless of the circumstances of our life. We act one way, and even though if the truth is known, something entirely different has taken place inside of us. There are places where, because of the surroundings, to perform and pretend everything's okay, a lot of times the church is that place too. We just pretend to be someone we're not. I don't know if your church is this way, but the church tends to celebrate people who have it all together. The church hasn't always embraced people when life gets messy, which is actually funny because that's exactly the opposite of how Jesus envisioned his church, I believe, right? Specifically today, though, I want you to consider the health of your soul. Truth is, many pastors aren't doing that well in their soul. And so I want you to think about your life and the health of your soul today. How healthy is your soul? And maybe the best way to have a healthy soul is to come clean with the fact if you know your soul is unhealthy. If we're talking about an unhealthy body, then you know what to do, right? You got to get in the gym. You got to eat a little less, a few less of those candy bars they set around everywhere. That's what you have to do. But let me ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your number today? How healthy is your soul? Now, I'm not addressing severe mental illness here or clinical depression. That would be a whole other subject, and I would encourage you to get professional help. Don't be afraid to get it. And I'm not addressing those times of external pressures, like when Hannah was experiencing infertility, or even those seasonal times like I was experiencing when my boys moved out. There were reasons for that, and I knew that grief would soon subside. It would get better over time. For most of us, I'm talking about the daily self-induced pressures of life that cause unhealthiness in our soul. I'm going to be real practical in this last time with you, and this is not counseling. Again, if you need counseling, get counseling. But one of the things that I tried to do, barring the external things I couldn't control, and those are going to come. People die that we love, their life, health situations, all those sort of things. I'm not really talking about those. I'm talking about the day in, day out health of your soul, and what are some ways to maintain a healthy soul in the midst of a busy culture? Any of you, just if somebody says, how are things, you're just busy. That would be your answer. These are 4 practical ways to better script your life, add a better rhythm to your life, if you will, to use Tony's word last night, so that ultimately you can have a healthier soul. That's what I want to give us, 4 practical suggestions. The first one is this, and I tried to do this every single year. Do an assessment of your time. Do an assessment of your time. If you were in financial struggles, if you were like you went to Dave Ramsey for help, what's the first thing he's going to do? He's going to encourage you to assess everything you're spending, right? So that's what I'm encouraging you to do with your time. Do an assessment of your time. Ephesians 5, verse 15 and 16 says, pay careful attention then to how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. The wording used here in the original language implies a very diligent, methodical approach. Pay careful attention to your time. How do you make the most of your time? You pay careful attention to the time you spend. When our youngest child was in elementary school, I packed his lunch. He didn't like school lunches, and so I packed his lunch. And so every night, maybe you've done something like this before, but we would take it was before we knew we weren't supposed to give our kids soft drinks, and so we would take soft drinks, we would wrap them in aluminum foil, place them in the freezer overnight, and then in the morning, you'd take that out, you'd put it down in the bottom, and it would be just the right temperature by lunchtime. And so then he had certain things he wanted. He was pretty much a creature of habit, and so he didn't like sandwiches. He wanted cheese or peanut butter and crackers, and then later he would want some kind of fruit snack, because we were trying to be a little bit healthy. And then he would want a little bit, some chips. We just keep adding them on. And pretty soon he would get to where the bag was up here, and I'd say, buddy, the bag is full. I mean, you're not even going to be able to carry the bag. But I love doing it because it was a great opportunity for me to pray for him and for his day, and I love to mess with him. One of my favorite things I did as a dad was sometimes I'd put things on his peanut butter crackers that he didn't know was coming. That's another story. It was just funny. But scarred him for life, But we finally ended up going to plastic bags because we just couldn't get enough into this bag. Imagine your life was like this paper bag. What you put in it's very important, but you can only fit so much. A problem you're already aware of, we're all busy people. It's not big church pastors, not small church pastors. We're all busy. It's not homemakers. We're all busy. And we're all getting busier all the time. There was once some thought that the increase in technology was supposed to make life simpler. Human advancement was supposed to make life simpler. How did that prediction turn out? No one sits around today and tries to figure out what to do with all their free time. One report says Americans work 700 more hours per year than they did 2 decades ago. And we have to fight to find time for leisure time today, don't we? The world isn't going to slow down anytime soon so we can catch up. Think about your calendar for just a moment and how you spend an average week. And if you would say, Ron, I have no average week, well, there may be some clue to the clutter that you have in your week. I was very methodical with my schedule, and we did have a large church. We had a lot of things going on, plenty of demands, and lots of things I wanted to do. But I was pretty rigid with my schedule. And I would even counter to say Jesus appears rigid with his schedule. He had to go there, and then he took interruptions as they came because he had a schedule he was working with. Here's a news flash. You're the boss of your schedule. We can go back to this morning's talk and talk about living for likes when we think our church controls our schedule. But God even gives you freedom in that most of the time. You mostly control the calendar you live by. Granted, there are some things that are out of your control, obviously, but most of our calendars are self-induced punishment to ourselves. So begin keeping in mind what you want out of life. That's where I like to start. What do I want to accomplish? Who do I want to be? What are some goals I have for my life? And then what is missing or what is lacking, what is disproportionate in your week according to your current calendar? What about in your home? If you examine just this past week or the past season, how was the quality of time with your family or with those you love the most? I learned years ago with our boys, it was not quantity of time with them. It was quality. It was not quality of time. It was quantity of time. I also learned with 2 boys, you can't get to the real teachable moments in their life if you don't have time invested in them to do so. With both my boys, and there's a few ladies in the room, I would say this about your husband too, if you're married, or if you want us to talk our best, get us doing something. And so with my boys, if I was throwing a baseball with one or kicking a soccer ball with the other, that's when the real stuff came out. You got to have time to do that. What about your work at the church? Do you constantly feel overwhelmed? Do you never feel complete, that things are complete? All of us have seasons like that. But if it's every day, day in and day out, and if it's negatively impacting your life or others' life around you, you may need a new plan for how you plan your week. And it may be you need to raise up some new people to do some of the things you feel like you have to do. This is a whole different talk, but I always share with pastors there's 3 reasons pastors don't delegate. Number 1 is pride. They don't want anybody else to get the credit. Number 2 is arrogance. They don't think that anyone could do it as well as they could. And number 3 is ignorance. They just don't realize it's not the biblical model that we've been handed. But what about in your personal life or in your life with God? How cluttered are you right now in this season of your life? And can you accomplish what you say you want to accomplish on the schedule you're currently living? Will the schedule you're living get you where you hope to go someday? A continually overwhelmed schedule, especially when you know in your heart it's misaligned with what you want in life, will lead you to a very unhealthy soul. In this step, you need to just ask hard questions. Where are you spending time? And let me just say this. Most of us deceive ourselves into thinking we can do more than we actually can. Or that our children don't need us as much as they do. If you aren't sure how you're doing in this area, ask some people who know you. If you're married, this can be a great couples project. If your children are old enough, ask them. The thing I've learned about my 2 boys is they will be completely honest with me, even if it hurts. So the first step is to assess the clutter. You've got to know where you're at before you can address where you're going. The second step, and it's rather obvious, you have to intentionally declutter. Once you find some places where your life is out of kilter, you have to begin to eliminate some of the clutter. You remember the story, Luke chapter 10, while they were traveling, he entered the village. A woman named Martha welcomed him into their home. She had a sister named Mary who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. And you know that story. You've preached that story before, most of you in the room. She was missing the ultimate, taking care of her many tasks. She was distracted by many things. And that's the thing about clutter. When we just have stuff on our calendar, it's a combination of many things. And clutter is always distracting. It's not necessarily all bad stuff. If it were getting rid of bad things, that would be easy. Sometimes it's the choices between good things. Even good stuff can become cluttered, though, if there's too much of it. Listen to 1 Thessalonians 5:21. But test all things, hold on to what is good. That verse doesn't say hold on to everything. The word good there actually means valuable or of highest value. You've got to determine, based on what I want to achieve in life, based on who I want to be as a person, as a husband, as a father, as a child of God, based on who I want to be someday, what are the most valuable things for me to add to my calendar? And what are the most valuable things for me to take off? And you have to do that in every area of your life. If you want a great family life, you have to consider your choices. If you want a great walk, you want to grow in your walk with Christ, if you want a healthy soul, you have to consider what are the most valuable things to go in your week. And you can't choose them all, or your soul's going to be very cluttered. I push back on the thought that we have to always be busy. Because even in busy seasons, we have a command we can't do anything about, and that's the command to rest. Remember, God created work, but He also created rest. Rest was there from the beginning. It wasn't an afterthought. Rest is a command. We're designed for it. Our bodies and our minds crave it. We're to rest even to the glory of God. Colossians 3:17 says, whatever you do, in word or in deed, do it in the name of the Lord Jesus. So don't consider rest a bad thing. But once you've begun the elimination process, this third step is a must. And pastors may need this word more than anybody else in our society at this time. You have to learn the value in the word no. If you don't, you'll soon fill yourself with clutter that will be very difficult to remove. We've got to stop glamorizing busyness, even in the church. You can be very busy and not be very holy. I know that's especially hard for some of you, so let me just go on record and say Jesus even commanded it. There are times to say no. Jesus said so. In Matthew 5, he said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Someone said no is a complete sentence. It's okay to use even in public. It's not a dirty word. It's even okay to tell your children no. And it's an okay word for pastors to use also. Look at your neighbor and just say the word no. Didn't that feel good? I just said say it once. You don't have to keep saying it. All right? You can try that when you get home. See how that works. But if we want to declutter our life, we've got to understand the power of the word no. How many times have you said yes to something and everything in you was screaming no? It's easier to say yes. As we said this morning, it makes people happy with us, creates more likes. But when the right answer is no, no's the right answer. One way to keep from overcommitting is to resolve to wait 24 hours before accepting an invitation. I do that most every time. Some say never add something to your schedule without first subtracting something else from it. Listen, your attempt to please everyone is ultimately going to end up pleasing no one. And you end up the most disappointed at your outcomes. And then the final suggestion here, I might even get us out early, Nathan. And this is the most important. The fourth thing you have to do is you have to carefully plan your yes. Everything's not a throwaway. You may need to add some things to your calendar, things you need to be doing to have a healthier soul. And one reason to declutter is so that you can have some margin where you can add a better yes. Yes is a good word. Look at your neighbor and say yes. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says he made everything beautiful in its time. And that's the key, in its time. Everything is beautiful in its time. But part of having a healthy soul is learning when it's time to say yes. What you say yes to is critically important to your soul, to your relationships with others and with God. You know, that's one reason that I protect my exercise time. I use my exercise time to decompress, I've gotten really good at answering emails if I need to, or reading, or whatever. It's my time. And the crazy thing about when we happened in our office building, we had a gym in our church, but in our office building we have a down in the basement. Not once has one of our staff members or church member, that's not true. They've interrupted, but our staff never came up to me and said, "Pastor, hey, I know you're exercising," but they just never did. But that was my time. It was a good yes. I knew that fueled me for the rest of the day. I have some monthly and regular meetings with people who give me life. They add value to me personally. That's a good yes. In Lexington, I like to hear from people that don't necessarily think like I think. And I met with a Catholic deacon. He was as godly as any man I've ever met, loved Jesus. One time he was actually studying to be a Catholic deacon as I met with him. That's a long process if you ever know anybody that does that. And he came to me one time and he said, this weekend was amazing. We had something called hermeneutics. Have you ever heard of that? And you can take a scripture and you can diagram it and pull it apart and apply it to your life. Have you ever thought of that? I'm like, Sometimes, it was so cool to see things just come alive in him. But he gave me life. That's also why Saturdays in the ministry went on my calendar. It went on the church calendar. Ron is off. Now, I realize you can't possibly do that depending on the size of your church or what your demands are, but there is a day in the week that you can. And if you can't, something is being done wrong leading that church to be a biblical model of a church. And that's my strong opinion. Because I'm going to tell you something, if your soul is so incredibly unhealthy, you're not leading that church the way it should be. And they're not relying on Jesus as much as they should be. That's a strong word, wasn't it? But for my wife and I, it was the day that she looked forward to. She knew, okay, I don't have access to him all this time. She just sent me a text a few minutes ago. I'm going to meet her at the airport in just a little while. And she said, I'm just looking forward to us. We've been together for a week, but she's been here. But I'm looking forward to just being us, She needs those times. And I needed to lead our church to understand we need those times, because they needed those times in their family too. There's got to be a time you turn everything off. By the way, the word rest, as God rested from his creation work, is actually an active word. It's an intentional step back, stop doing, and reflect to celebrate on what God has done. When God rested, did he need to relax his body or his mind? He just overexerted himself? Of course not. Physically, God doesn't get tired like we do. When the Bible says God rested, it implies he stopped long enough to reflect upon and enjoy what he made. And that's to be our regular practice, just as God demonstrated for us. We're to step back from our worries and from our fears long enough to reflect on the goodness of God around us. You've got to spend ample time with the Creator of your soul. This week, I don't know if he did so here, but he did where I live. He's created a sunset, and it was gorgeous. And the more I looked at it, the more amazing my God became. Did you notice it? This week in a coffee shop, I was working on some emails, and there's always another email that has to be replied to, but a baby was giggling at the table next to me. Is there anything better than a baby's giggle? And I don't even know what the baby was giggling about other than breathing air. Just giggling. But it was great to just stop and see the beauty of what God could create. I was sitting out at the hotel where we're staying this morning, this bird, I'd never seen this kind of bird before, but it was just, I've got some interesting birds out here, and just watching this bird just kind of play around, and what probably wasn't playing, it was probably working, but to me it looked like play, it looked like fun. And it was worth stopping for a few minutes and just reflecting on the glory of God in that bird. And that's to be our regular practice. We all love to teach our church the promise of Matthew 11. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." The key there is you have to go to him. Here's something I've learned. In the busiest seasons, rest becomes even more important to me. I've been known to disappear in the middle of the day. I've not found this place in Dallas yet, but sometimes I'll go walk in the cemetery. I've just never had anybody bother me there. If I do, I'll stop. But I'm just like... We find Jesus just before he was arrested slipping away to pray. In the midst of the busiest season of his ministry, Jesus rested and Jesus prayed. I just completed, before I left the church, and it was amazing, we were just finishing the series as I announced I was leaving, a 16-week series on prayer. And I discovered the number one reason Jesus was effective in prayer. Would you like to know that? The number one reason Jesus was effective in prayer is because Jesus prayed. Prayed when he got up in the morning. He prayed before his food. Prayed before he did a miracle. Prayed when he went to bed at night. Jesus prayed because he saw the value in prayer. You got to have time to do that. But at the busiest point, Jesus disappeared. Does it make sense to some, to those of us who are calendar-driven, who are A-type, who want to accomplish a lot of things? That's the time you could be working. But when you understand the purpose and the blessing of rest, it makes perfect sense. It's even life-giving. You need power this world can't even offer you. Take the bag you received when you came in. And there's more out there if you don't have it. And some of you can't follow directions, so you're already starting to put your books in there. But don't do that just yet. Some of you were making hand puppets. I saw that. It's okay. And it's always the senior pastors who can't stand the unknown. Like, well, what is it? What are we going to do with it? Just wait. You'll get instructions. But here's what I want you to do with this sack. I want you to take this home sometime today, later today, this week. I want you to put it somewhere visible. I want you to just write on this bag, my life. What if everything in your life had to fit in this bag? You only have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, and more than that, you only have one life to live. How much can you pack in it? And if it's overflowing, you got to take something else out. Not everything's going to fit if you want a decluttered, a healthy soul. So choose wisely. Because I've learned, and I've actually learned it the hard way. It took me now at this season of my life to understand many times how we pack the sacks of our life determine the ultimate health of our soul. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for these who serve your church. Many of them are probably stressed out right now because of things that are going on, external or internal. And I understand there's probably some that are going through some real challenges in their church. And I understand the expectations their church places on them. Many times it would be unfair. But God, you're the author of our life, and it's you we aim to please. So teach us to number our days and number them well. Let us guard our hearts, for out of it come all the issues of life. And let us live with healthy souls. And God, for those who may be here today and they're just really in a dark place right now, this was not the message they needed, Lord. They need more from you. They need your hand. They need your comfort. They may need the arm of another brother to come alongside of them or sister. God, would you allow them to be vulnerable enough to say, I need help? And would they find their help from you in their time of need? Thank you for these who serve. In Jesus' name, amen.